Statement of Marjorie Holt regarding a peculiar pine tree. Original statement given March 24th, 2004. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist at the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins. While I was a student at the University of Lincoln, I managed to get accommodation in this really nice part of town. Very middle class from my initial impressions. A feature that always struck me as odd was the staircase. There were those kinds of stairs that go up a few steps, plateau around a bend, and then continue going upwards. I know a lot of buildings have those kinds of stairs, but in a home it felt kind of bougie at the time. I later found out that they were called switchback stairs, but that doesn't really matter. Above the plateau was a windowsill, way too high up to reach from the bend. Even my taller friends found it difficult to reach. It's at perfectly eye level from the top banister of the stairs, though. Listen, I came from a working-class background before dragging myself off to university, so this might be a stupid conclusion to come to, but that window also struck me as uniquely middle-class. The only view of the outside world it offered was of the flat brick wall of my neighbour's house. I don't know, a completely useless window that has about a metre of space to breathe felt like something someone with a comfortable amount of money would make. I briefly considered that the original homeowners were just very proud of their brickwork and wanted a view of some inferior wall to scoff at. Wouldn't surprise me. This is only relevant because it all started while I was on that staircase. Late one night, after a night out, I was hobbling up the stairs, taking excruciating care on each step so as to not repeat mistakes of drunken nights past. And as I made it to the plateau, I faintly made out the sounds of scratching coming from the window. Nocturnal birds aren't uncommon, so I wasn't scared per se, but I certainly was curious. So I took significantly less care in making my way to the viewing dock. Before I could get halfway up the second set, the scratching turned into a rackety thud, similar to the sound of a double-decker bus hurtling through the branches of an untended tree. The thud made several racketish impacts. Startled, I missed the next step and fell faster than my inebriated brain could follow. I felt the pain in my left eye much sooner than I'd noticed the top stair approaching my face. Twisting from the pain, I writhed onto my back to catch a glimpse of the window above. Before passing out, I saw the last thwack of a tree branch lapping against the window. Luckily, my housemate heard the slip and came to help. The last thing I remember thinking before slipping out of the land of consciousness was a recollection. There isn't a tree there. I think it took me about 12 hours to come to. Apparently it's very bad to fall unconscious after suffering head trauma. I don't think it was that serious, though. I might have just fallen asleep for all I know. Whatever the case, I woke up in hospital with little to no memory of the night prior. It was only very recently that I'd put together that that night was the first time I saw it. I didn't take very long to recover by choice. I probably could have used another week or so to take it easy. The doctor did say that the damage was minimal, but certainly not ideal. But I figured that if I could walk in a straight line, then I was probably fine. In retrospect, that isn't the best idea, but I had a hiking trip planned with some friends not long after, and I was not missing that. Again, looking back now, I really should have missed it. I had to take several breaks on the first day. I got so nauseous that I had to be practically carried all the way up to cabin 15C, which was the place that we'd booked out to sleep in halfway through our journey. It felt awful, making everyone go out of their way for me. And it was a mountain trail as well, so certainly not easy to traverse up or down. That night, I had trouble sleeping, so I stepped outside for a cigarette. I went out the back door because I didn't want to wake the two who were sleeping in the front room. Just as I lit the cigarette, I could have sworn I heard the sound of metal creaking, like when a busted machine is fighting against its own frosted parts after a long winter. I turned around to gauge where the noise might have come from, but what caught my attention first was the tip of a pine tree peeking over the cabin. It shouldn't have been an ordinary. We were literally surrounded by pine trees, but this one was close. To the cabin, I mean. The leaves were practically resting on the roof, and from where I was standing, my perspective of this tree made it look as though it was standing right outside the front door. At that moment, I became dreadfully aware of the wind. Earlier, I could have sworn the only sounds around me were of the wind. The sudden envelopment of the cabin in a thick blanket of nothing whenever a particularly strong gust would bellow up the mountain. The constant chatter of foliage brushing up against itself, so ever-present that you tune it out. Now, those sounds were joined by the faint but irritating rattle of sticks against glass. This, similarly, shouldn't have unsettled me as much as it did, due to it likely also being a result of the wind. But something told me it didn't sound right. The rattling sounded almost rhythmic. That's not the right word. It was consistent. Even just for a second, when the wind stopped blowing, I still heard the rattle. I started to make my way around the cabin to investigate. As I reached the spot where I am sure a tree once stood, I was met with the completely clear front door that I saw when I first got there. The rattling noise had stopped, or rather, it had been replaced now by a dull tap, as if the glass was now thick wood. I took a cursory glance back at where I was standing not 30 seconds prior, and saw a pine tree. I hadn't noticed how long I'd been contemplating the tree until I was jolted to presence by the cigarette I was holding. It had almost completely burned up and gave me a small fright when the embers had reached my finger. I also didn't seem to realize until that moment that in my other hand, I was holding my lighter. It was lit, and I was holding down the mechanism that keeps it so. I shut the lighter, snubbed out the cigarette, and began to walk to the new tree, only realizing when a gust of wind forced my eyes shut that it had vanished. Again. I couldn't go back to bed after that. Later on in the trip, we had to take a suspended wooden bridge across a ravine. The kind that shakes every time you take a step. We were assured that it was safe to cross, but that wasn't really a concern of mine. I knew it would be safe, otherwise they never would have let us cross it. And contrary to most people I've been told, I find the space beneath that bridge to be quite mesmerizing, in a way. It's something about heights that I find beautiful. The way you can just grasp an entire picture of what's below just by looking. Sure, you can get that anywhere, but when you're up high it feels illustrative. Like what you're seeing isn't completely real, but altogether certainly accurate. Shapes you could cover with your thumb could probably dwarf you in person. The smallest puddle could be a vibrant lake. In this particular ravine, there was a stream running through. It looked so inconsequential that you could splash around in it and still only get your ankles wet. Yet when our guide jokingly advised that in the event you should fall, do not enter the current unless you want to be swept halfway across the county, my fascination continued to stifle me. That was until the guide clarified that the fall itself would probably kill you, so there's no need to worry about that, in his words. One of my friends, Bethany Saunders, mistook my stalling for hesitation and quickly made her way across the bridge to show me and the others that there was nothing to worry about. She made it almost to the end of the bridge when she shouted across that there was nothing to be afraid of, and insisted that we hurry it up already. I was ready to humour her request until I was met with a moment of true hesitation. In front of her, rooted right at the first step of solid ground after the bridge, was that pine tree again. Beth was looking over her shoulder, so she hadn't noticed it yet. But she did stop dead in her tracks to point at something behind me. She shouted something to the effect of, "When did that get there?" and had the rest of us turn around to check. Nobody was sure what she was talking about, so we turned back around to ask, only to spot that she was gone. And so was the tree. Everyone just thought she was joking. Get us with the old, "What's that behind you?" hide, and then jump out of the bushes to spook us once we're safely across. But that didn't happen. One moment she was there, the next, gone. Our guide called for a search team, and we spent hours looking for her. I didn't have the heart to tell anyone that as we were crossing the bridge, I was sure that I saw a trickle of red flowing down the stream below. And beside the stream, the tip of a pine tree. They found her body the next day, halfway across the county. Nobody asked me what happened when I got home. I think that they all heard, and they just assumed I didn't want to talk about it. I did want to talk about it, but nobody asked. One time I shared a story about Beth in conversation with some friends that we used to go clubbing with, and they just looked at me. They stared with a gaze that travelled somewhere between sympathy and perplexity, and after a beat that lingered like an unwelcome house guest, they moved on, like I never even spoke in the first place. Now it keeps appearing. It'll come and go. I spot it about twice or thrice a day, always blowing to a constant wind that comes from anywhere but here, gently jostling to the right. One time I spotted it in the middle of the road outside my living room window. During a storm, the rain was being pelted at such speed you could almost swear it was going horizontally. Despite that, the pine tree remained in its calm breeze, refusing the call of influence as if wind travelling at 93 miles per hour were nothing more than a suggestion. I started to get paranoid. Nowhere was free from it. Every window I glanced through, every door I opened, every road I crossed, if I wanted it gone, it was there, and if I chanced a close encounter, it was gone before I could tear its bark away. Something would always force my eyes off it just before I got there. It was maddening. I was sure that other people could see it. How could they not? It was bloody massive. At least 20 feet tall, but nobody ever mentioned it, even when it would appear where logically a tree has no business growing. They would, however, interact with it. Only sometimes, but it would affect other people. I once witnessed a friend of mine throw away a chippy box where, by all accounts, a bin once was. He saw his leftovers flop against and subsequently spill all over the tree. And what did he do? He picked it up. He said, "Silly me," and walked back over. He must have been in some sort of trance, because if not, then he would have noticed me look at him with a face of utter bewilderment. But he didn't. Once he reached where I was standing, he looked down at his hands at the rubbish he was holding, and then went back to it. He threw his box away, in a bin that was now, and always should have been, there. I'd been dealing with it for the better part of a year when I just couldn't take it anymore. Sure, it wasn't hurting me, but I knew that it killed Beth. I just didn't know how. I had to know. I started doing experiments. I needed to understand it. I went to public places, extremely busy places, places where I knew people would, or rather should, spot a tree. Supermarkets, cinemas, gyms. And while doing these experiments, I figured it out. I think it needs a barrier. It would always appear where a threshold or an object would separate us, like the far side of an aisle, or just beyond the wall of a cubicle. I figured that it had to follow some sort of logic while at the cinema. I was sat in the furthest back seat to the right, and it planted its malicious roots in the front row, in the leftmost seat. As soon as the movie ended, I bolted to a different screen. I didn't care if I got caught. I needed to test a theory. I broke into a screening at some sappy romance movie. It was at that point in all romance movies where it looks like the main couple is broken up, so they can do one big final declaration of love at an airport or something. Anyway, I made it to my seat, which was luckily empty, and waited. I sat there for half an hour of grueling slop while thinking to myself. In the seat where the tree had been in the last room was some guy. He looked to be on a date with the lady next to him. Her head was resting lazily on his shoulder. I briefly contemplated what I was doing. Was I about to kill him? Was he about to suffer the same fate as Beth? Surely not. There are no ravines in a cinema. One would hope. I decided, to be safe, that I'd switch to the seat on the back left. There was no one in the correlating front right seat, so I reasoned it was fine. And as I stood up, I took one last, stupid glance at the couple. And there stood my follower, with the girl now resting on pine needles. When the movie had finished, the girl seemed to wake up, and motioned to the seat beside her. It was empty. She looked devastated. She hurried out of the cinema, picking something from her hair. I inspected the seat, and all I found was a scrap of torn denim. I've now realized that it was mocking me that day, because ever since it has refused to be consistent. Despite the fact that it continues to stay on the other side of whatever is in between us, I've never seen it in the same spot twice. Except one spot. Just outside the window of my switchback stairs. It continued to haunt me every day, with its jeering taps against that oh-so-unreachable window, laughing in a tongue that no one hears but I understand viscerally. It taunts me, like a voyeuristic wind chime that rasps in the breeze. Someone had to know it was there, and if they didn't notice it, then I would make them. I reasoned that if people can't see it, then cameras might. So I tore my housemate away from whatever she was doing and handed her my camcorder. I waited until that verdant bastard showed itself, and once it did, I told her to record the window and do not, for any reason, stop. I raced to the garden where my landlord kept a ladder. I dragged it to the wall beneath the window. The tree had disappeared for me, but I wasn't concerned by that. All I needed to do was plant my face where a camcorder must still see a tree, and in the process show someone, anyone, that there was something deeply wrong. I don't know what I expected to happen, but when I set and climbed the ladder, I was filled with sheer triumph. Although I could no longer see a tree, I was sure that I had finally gotten a win against it. I hoisted myself to the glass, grinning ear to ear, assuming victory, and instead of a housemate holding a camcorder, I saw the entire stairway encased in bark. Where my housemate was, where the grain covering the walls, doors, floor, and ceiling led, was a tree. I suppose it goes without saying that my housemate went missing, and when I returned inside, there was naught but a trace of pine in sight. The camcorder was left on the floor, but there's no video of the window, though. I've handed it to your staff as evidence, but there's not much on there. I prefer to stay in urban areas now. Not because I can't be around trees or anything, but now, at least I can tell which one is following me. Statement ends. At the time this statement was taken, a follow-up investigation was held to confirm the facts. I can confirm that a Bethany Saunders was indeed found dead in the Lake District in the early months of 2003, about a year before this statement was given. In addition to this, there is a missing persons report of someone by the name of Chloe Manning in Lincolnshire late that year. As Ms. Holt did not provide a name for her housemate, it is unclear whether these are the same person. We tried to contact Ms. Holt for a follow-up interview. Unfortunately, it seems that she passed away in a motorway accident a few months after giving her statement. Witnesses report seeing her stop her car in the middle of the N25, getting out of it, and with what reports call a disconcerting degree of focus, sprinting to the opposite side of the road. The lorry driver that hit her claims to have not seen her until it was too late, making the excuse that something on the left-hand side of the road was distracting him. Lastly, I had a look at the camcorder which was hidden in the archives, frustratingly far from where this statement was located. I was sure this was the very same camcorder due to a faded handwritten sticker which states, "Property of M. Holt." The most recent recording on it is pitch black. However, the audio is still legible. Here it is. Disconcerting, to say the least. I was ready to disregard this statement as the ramblings of a concussed lunatic until now. At least now I have a guess as to why the filing cabinet which contained this statement was filled with pine needles. End recording. The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by Rusty Quill and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license. Today's episode was written and performed by Jay Blakesley, inspired by the works of Jonathan Sims and Alexander J. Newell. If you enjoyed the episode, go listen to the actual podcast. What are you still doing here? You've got 200 episodes to catch up on. Chop chop!